Alright guys, this is going to be the review for the practice FRQs, and so what we are going to do here is I'm going to go through this with you guys, so follow along. If you have any questions or anything, then let me know tomorrow. So the first one we're going to go over is the foreign exchange one. This is not one that you guys practice. I just want to work it out so you guys can kind of see me working this out. So Japan, the European Union, Canada, and Mexico have flexible exchange rates. Suppose Japan attracts an increased amount of investment from the European Union. Using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market in Japan, show the effect of the increase in foreign investment on the real interest rate in Japan. So this one kind of starts off a little bit differently, and basically what ends up happening here, so 2A, loanable funds, more money is coming in. So what that means is that is going to be at a real interest rate, quantity of loanable funds. Sorry if it's a little sloppy. So we have our demand for loanable funds there, got our supply of loanable funds there, the equilibrium point there, and Q1. So this is our initial equilibrium point, R1 there. Okay, now the increase in foreign investment on real estate is actually going to increase the supply of loanable funds, because what ends up happening, all right, is they're moving their money into banks, and that increases the amount of money that banks have to loan out. So, loanable funds market, Japan. Alright, that's part one. And part two, and you would of course write this neater than what I'm currently writing it because I'm trying to draw it on the screen here. How will the real interest rate change in Japan identified affect the employment level in Japan in the short run? So the employment, I'm just going to speak this out. So employment, basically, employment's going to go up, so you could say that either like that, or unemployment would go down because it's cheaper to borrow money, so it's going to lead to more investment spending. Now, part B, all right, what you're going to do, suppose in a different part of the world, the real interest rate in Canada increases relative to that in Mexico. Using a correctly labeled graph, the foreign exchange market for the Canadian dollar, show the effect of the change in interest rate in Canada on the international value of the Canadian dollar expressed as Mexican pesos per Canadian dollar. Okay, so we're going to label this as Mexican pesos per Canada, right there, right? And then we're going to put that as the exchange rate. And again, you would write this neater. I'm just trying to get it all to fit here. We have our quantity of Canadian dollar, and you would write that all out. Supply, Canadian dollar, and demand for Canadian dollar. Alright, now this is their initial exchange rate equilibrium, and quantity right there. So when interest rates go up in Canada, that's going to increase the demand for Canadian dollars, because people in Mexico are going to look to save money at higher interest rates relative to the peso. So that's going to increase that. So we're going to have ER2 and Q2. Now to do that, this is going to be, I'm going to kind of draw this over here on this other one just to kind of show you what would happen here on the Mexican peso side. So we have our Canadian dollar per Mexican peso, and we have our supply of Mexican peso, our demand. I'm sorry again that this is written poorly, but I'm trying my best here. I'm going to write out exchange rate here just so you guys can see this. Alright, and current equilibrium point. So in order to Q1, Q Mexico, alright, ER1 right there. Alright, so in order for Mexico to obtain Canadian currency, they would have to supply more of their currency. And if you remember your 4 rules, this follows along with those 4 rules here, because one currency appreciates, one currency depreciates. Alright, so if you have any questions on that, just let me know tomorrow. Part 2, how will the change in international value of the Canadian dollar identified in part B1 affect Canadian exports? Well, because the Canadian dollar increases in value, exports will go down and imports will go up. So it'll import more from Mexico. All right. Okay. So let me erase all this and come back up with the next question. Okay, so on this next one here, we're going to be going over the Phillips curve. So it says the question, inflation and expected inflation are important determinants of economic activity. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the short-run Phillips curve. Okay, now, so this is A. They technically don't ask you to draw the long-run Phillips curve. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw it. Alright, I'm not sure why it's popping up on the right side of the screen here, but we're just going to roll with it, because then it just disappears. Alright, so we've got our short run Phillips curve, and you would write out unemployment rate, inflation rate right there. Now, remember the long run Phillips curve is a vertical line at the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, or the natural rate of unemployment, whatever. Okay, so that's part A. Part B, using your graph from part A, show an effect on the increase in the expected rate of inflation. That's going to cause a shift to the right of the Phillips curve. Short Phillips curve 2, right there. What is the effective increase on the expected inflation rate on the long run? There is no impact on the long run Phillips curve. D, given the increase in the expected rate of inflation from part B, will the nominal interest rate on new loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged? Now, this is on new loans that the bank is going to issue. So what they're going to do, because inflation is now expected to be at a higher rate no matter the level of economic output, they're going to raise their nominal interest rates to make up for that. Okay, so any new person that shows up to get a loan is going to pay a higher interest rate because of the higher inflation rate, because banks still need to make the money. Part 2, will the real interest rate on new loans increase, decrease, or remain unchanged? Those would remain unchanged based on the given information that you know. Now, assume the nominal interest rate is 8%. Borrowers and lenders expect the inflation rate to be 3% and the growth rate of real GDP to be 4%. Calculate the real interest rate. This one has some distractors in there for you. So you need the real interest rate is simply the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. Okay, so if we simply, if we simply take the 8% minus 3%, we would get a 5% real interest rate there. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to pause it and erase it. We'll pull up the next question. Okay, so now we're going to go over the long one. Basically what it's asking for you to do here is to just work through the economic knowledge that you have in order to solve the problem. Okay, so we're going to start off by taking a look here. I'm going to draw it on the bottom part down here initially, but you would just draw it all on the graph paper. All right, I'm just doing that for space, so I have no space to work it out on one screen for you. Now, assume that the United States economy is currently operating below the full employment level of real GDP with a balanced budget. It's a lot to take in right there. Okay, so we've got part A. We'll get started off with right there. Draw a correctly labeled graph of the aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply, and show each of the following in the United States. The current output and price level labeled as Y1 and PL1 respectively. Full employment output labeled as YF. Now, the key here is right here. Currently operating below the full employment level of real GDP. So, you have to think to yourself, what's the full employment level? Okay, that's a level. What's the level below it? Well, that means less people are working. Therefore, that must mean that we are in a recession. And so you would just graph a palooza, right? And you would just know that how to draw it in a recessionary gap. Short-run aggregate supply curve, aggregate demand curve, long-run aggregate supply. So what did it say to label it as? Nope. It says to do it as Y1. Okay, just making sure. Alright, so Y1. PL1. I don't know why it doesn't want to stay there. And then it says label this as YF. So you just do whatever they say. Part B, I'm going to write this off to the side here so we can see it. The United States government increases spending on goods and services by $100 billion, which is financed by borrowing. How will the increase in government spending affect each of the following? Cyclical unemployment will decrease. All right, that's going to cause a rightward shift in the aggregate timing curve. The natural rate of unemployment will remain unchanged. All right, because the natural rate of unemployment is simply frictional plus structural unemployment. If the part C, if the marginal propensity to consume is equal to 0.75, calculate the maximum possible change in real GDP that could result from the $100 billion increase in government spending. So we would simply do 1 over the marginal propensity to save, 0.25. We would get 4 times 100 billion, and we would say real GDP could increase by $400 billion. Okay. Part D, using a correct level graph of the loanable funds market, show the effect of a $100 billion increase in government spending on the real interest rate. Now it says right there that we're going to assume that they're not going to raise taxes to do this. So we would just draw our market for loanable funds here. Real interest rate, quantity of loanable funds, we have our supply of loanable funds, and our demand of loanable funds. The equilibrium point there shows us their current level of borrowing, Q1, R1, but because the government is now borrowing more money to finance this, it increases the demand, which then leads to a higher real interest rate because there's more money being borrowed. Now, based on the real interest rate in Part D, what effect on the long-run economic growth rate does this have? It will lead to long-run economic growth to decrease because it's going to be more expensive to borrow money in the long run. And when that happens, businesses will not invest as much, and so that's going to lead to a decline in investment spending. Part F, now assume that instead of financing the $100 billion increase in government spending, the United States government increases taxes by $100 billion. Will this equal increase in government spending and taxes? Will the real GDP increase, decrease, or remain the same? It will still increase because the spending multiplier is higher than the tax transfer multiplier. So the tax transfer multiplier decreases the economy, the spending increases it, but the spending increases it by more than the taxes decrease it. All right, so that is it. I am done with this. If you have any questions, please ask me tomorrow before the test.